Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call upon an excellent panel of speakers who will guide us in discussing the potential that's there to localize supply chains. Bona Kashinga, Managing Director for Landsworth Investment Limited, please do join me here on stage. Bona leads Landsworth Investment, focused on property and trade investment opportunities along the Zambia-DRC mining corridors. He has extensive experience in finance, real estate, capital markets, and development-linked investments in the Copper Belt region. Next up, we have Mr. Isaac Kahara, the country head for East Africa, UK Export Finance. Isaac oversees the UK Export Finance's operations in East Africa, supporting structuring and financing of major infrastructure and industrial projects. He has extensive expertise in project finance and risk management. Last but not least, we have Maxwell Okello, who is the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Kenya. He leads the chamber, driving US-Kenya trade and investment. He brings over 2 decades of experience in mobilizing private capital, shaping public policy, and advancing sustainable economic development across Africa. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, let's dive right into it. There's a lot that's happening in terms of global developments. I want to start with you, Maxwell. How do you see the convergence of urban development, what we're talking about at this summit, and critical minerals in terms of shaping the US investment flows into Africa? Is there a genuine appetite, for instance, to support resource-based industrialization?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mwanda, for that. So I represent an organization at the intersection of policy, investment, and of course, execution, right? When it comes to economic opportunities in this country. Currently a portfolio of over 300 companies that are invested in the bilateral relationship, commercial relationship between Kenya and the US. And so to your question, I think we are in a very unique point in time where there's this rare alignment of one, the focus on rare earth minerals, on the one hand, Africa's urbanization, rapid urbanization, and the need for growth, right? And so if you look at the US and the fact that they are prioritizing rare earth or critical minerals, I think that's the term that is used, critical minerals, is actually a national security priority for the US. Now, what does that mean for Africa? I see it as an opportunity to turn up as an alternative, right? We have a really great opportunity given that 30% of rare earth minerals are actually in Africa. And so there is this window of opportunity for us to position ourselves as a contributor and a cooperator in that space. And I think that this is something that is actually quite intentional from a US perspective, and that it gives us that opportunity for us to leverage this rare moment in space.
Max, so just to stay with you, I mean, currently the US policy is quite inward looking. You would agree with me, right? And there is a push to bring back manufacturing. We've seen a number of legislation being enacted to support this agenda, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and a few others. Do you see, yes, there's an opportunity, but do you see that there's potential for it to be actualized, that US investments might actually be keen to go into more beneficiation as opposed to just exports of the critical minerals that are needed?
Yeah, I completely believe that while this may seem as an obstacle, it's actually an opportunity. Africa can position itself to be a partner that would help drive the US's own domestic industrialization agenda or manufacturing agenda. And to do that, Just to give you a simple example, AI right now is a big deal. AI is a large consumer of semiconductors. Semiconductors require rare minerals to be able to for manufacturing, as an ingredient in the manufacturing of semiconductors. And so we have that opportunity to be not just providers of the basic material, but at least get to a level where we can process some of those rare earth minerals and be providers or suppliers of semiconductors to the US. As a matter of fact, there is a company right here in Kenya, 2 hours away from Nairobi, that is doing exactly that. Manufacturing semiconductors and shipping to the US.
That's quite interesting. Any impact of the tariffs on this company in terms of competitiveness?
Let's just say the world is a very different place nowadays. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the impacts that we're trying to navigate. The tariff impact is definitely one of them. But it does not stop commerce from happening.
All right. No, thank you so much. I want to move to you, Bona. How are firms, even just the government in Zambia or local communities in areas like the Northwestern, which has seen a huge boom in terms of mining, right? It's referred to as the new copper belt. How are they responding to this global demand for critical minerals, and what opportunities are there for the mineral beneficiation that we are talking about?
Thank you very much. Zambia has an ambitious target of reaching 3 million metric tons of copper production by 2031. Right now, I think Zambia has grown its production of copper from a low of about 656,000 metric tons in 2022 to where we are right now, just about to hit 1 million. That's almost 67% increase within a 4-year period. The critical minerals that Zambia is producing in the Northwest are several: copper, cobalt, lithium, uranium, magnesium, nickel, with Africa's largest nickel mine projected to actually be sitting in Northwestern Province, a mine run by First Quantum Minerals. The race towards supplying critical minerals involves a couple of steps. One, the nationwide geological survey, which is currently underway. We've been using data that essentially is slightly old and dated. So there has been, from about 2024, a high-resolution aerial geophysical survey that has been going on in Zambia, expected to conclude within this year with a very clear map of what sits beneath the surface. There are already, of course, known deposits of many other things, including gold. This, exploration is being undertaken by both the public sector, but also by, private sector players. You've got explorations going on across the entire country. Rio Tinto is exploring. The senior mines that are already, on the ground, such as First Quantum Minerals, a Canadian Toronto Exchange listed mine, is exploring all over Zambia. It's also picking up a number of offtake agreements with junior mines, such as Fishtail Mine in the Mukushi farming block area, Prospect Mine, which just issued, I think, a note on the London alternate investment market for some, critical finds within the Kalumbila area. There's also a lot of exploration that is also going on in the southern part, apart from the Northwest. I think Govix has just made an announcement of significant results for uranium that essentially will be something that goes towards a lot of the critical minerals requirement across the world, whether that's batteries, whether that's energy production, with the possibility of 1 or 2 nuclear plants sitting within the country. The other issue is increased capital expenditure in smeltering and mining. This is spanning almost $15 billion, happening within a 7-year period. Barrick Gold, which wants to change its name for obvious reasons, more copper than gold that they are actually mining and trading now, is spending almost about $2 billion in what they're calling the Super Pit mine. This is expected to be the largest, actually, copper mine on the continent. First Quantum, again, is spending as well something in the region of about $1.2 billion on S3 expansion of their mine, and also expanding their nickel mine, enterprise mine within Kalumbila. You've got many other mines, such as Moxico, owning 2 mines in Zambia, investing in the Mimbula mine on the Copper Belt region, investing in an area called Mufumbwe in the Kalengwa mine. You've got Chinese mines as well, China non-ferrous metal mine, which owns about 3 mines, investing roughly about $1.3 billion. And so you can actually see that there's a significant progression towards capital expenditure, towards mining, but also smeltering. We do smelter for Zambian mines, but we also smelter for the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so across the Zambian borders, in an area called Kambimba in northwestern province, you've got the Kolwezi industrial mining belt for the DRC, which has one of the largest copper mines and other critical mineral mines, such as Ivanhoe and so on. So it is important for that development to go on. There is also a significant expansion in the the generation of energy, distribution, and also bringing onshore other types of energy. These mines require significant energy, and there is a need to be able to ramp up almost 4,000 megawatts of power. Some of what involves the region is also coming up with an interconnector between the East African power pool and the Southern African power pool. Right now, Zambia and Tanzania are completing the Tanzania interconnector, which will essentially bring power from East Africa into the Southern African region, where there's a critical shortage of power. Right now, we're experiencing a certain level of load shedding or power deficits on our national grid, but there's also a significant acceleration towards all the other alternative sources of power. There are other opportunities at community levels, such as chiefdom trusts and their communities beginning to make available land for the creation of cities that need to be able to support these mining belts. And so the government, through the Urban and Rural Development Act, has been able to make planning possible without the need for this chiefdom trust to be able to hand over land to the state. And so you are seeing professional developers, Landsworth being one of them, together with charter cities, beginning to explore on how to be able to plan for huge localities. One of those locations is almost 3,400 square kilometers, 80 kilometers to the DRC border from a place called Lumwana West to Kambimba, which is on the border with Kolwezi. These are huge projects that are happening right now.
What role would the Lobito Rail Corridor play in terms of incentivizing increased investments in mineral beneficiation, and even just linking that to new city developments? How does it link in?
Yeah, I mean, the Lobito Railway Corridor essentially brings 3 countries plus America, Angola, Zambia, and the DRC, into a project to be able to construct, the rail line from Lobito Port in Angola into Chingola in Zambia, with the other span through the DRC into Lubumbashi. The Zambian span is roughly about 560 kilometers from Chingola, a copper belt town, into a town called Jimbe at the tip of Zambia, neighboring Angola. That entire, span, spars huge mining, clusters. You've got the First Quantum Minerals, mines, 3 of them, Kansanshi, which is one of the top, 10 global mining, mines. You've got, there are 2 mines, Trident Sentinel, copper, and Trident Enterprise, what will essentially be Africa's largest nickel mine. You've got Barrick Gold with Lumwana and their Super Pit, project. You've got other mines in between, including Kansenseli, which is a gold producer. All of these projects that require value chains to be located close by. Rail is, the most, opportune way of being able to transport bulk materials. If you come into Zambia, you will immediately notice the Great North Road is essentially falling apart because of the huge amount of cargo, very heavy cargo that moves on those roads. It's very often, you have cargo that requires the electricity company to be, removing power lines as a piece of equipment is moving. You sometimes have something as big as 500 tons moving on rail for almost 3 weeks from one of the ports heading into the northwest. Rail will be able to ensure that that is able to be moved at cost, and also moved in a more sustainable manner. But you also have the creation of, talent industries, education to be specific, to be able to localize themselves along the Lubito rail spur to ensure that the mines that need to be able to produce and add value within Zambia have got the talent that is required at the trade level for those who are artisanal, skilled people, but also at the level of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Mm-hmm. That is a key requirement. But equally, the Lubito corridor requires a lot of other logistics hubs to be created. Mm-hmm. You need to have an interlink between rail and road. And so they have to be those particular interchanges where cargo can move from road to rail and rail to road, depending on whether it's reaching its destination and so on. Mm-hmm. Power, again, like I mentioned, absolutely critical. There has to be lots of power in there. Hopefully, those locomotives will one day be, electric locomotives, mm-hmm. because the three countries have got what it takes to be able to provide for electric, trains and so on.
So, but I want to pick up on a point you made, which is that, value chain should come close, should be localized. And we've spoken about a lot of opportunities, and I think Maxwell touched on that as well. He's very optimistic. But I want to turn to you, Isaac. Africa has for a long time been deemed to be quite uncompetitive when it comes to value addition, right? Cost of production is high for various reasons, infrastructure deficits, the weak governance that we've been talking about this morning, low skills. What would incentivize investors to really invest in, say, a new urban project that can anchor this kind of value addition? What are they looking for in terms of bankability, in terms of governance, some of which we probably know, and also return?
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe let me start with a positive note by saying that actually localization has been successful to a certain extent in some of the countries. And if I could give some examples, South Africa has done quite a bit on gold, platinum, and diamonds. And then you have your Botswanas and Namibias, again, on the diamond side. Copper in Zambia, as briefly mentioned. And then moving to the west, likes of Ghana with gold, and up north in Morocco, who are doing very well in phosphates as well. It's not a critical mineral, but one that is key to the agricultural sector, on fertilizers, etc. And indeed, the key success factors for that has led to this type of localization are plenty. Let's start with government policy. So in these countries, there's a deliberate effort by government to ensure that there is stable regulation that governs the mining sector. Because what investors look for is stability. Stability in not just in legislation, but also in things like contract security, just ensuring that the investment are secure and are protected. But also tax incentives. For instance, ensuring that minerals that have value addition benefit from tax incentive vis-a-vis minerals that are exported raw. So you can see some measures that work there. And again, as mentioned, infrastructure is key. So access to ports and being able to ship out your minerals that have been refined or have been added value locally. Not to mention access to reliable power. This is a big issue. As a matter of fact, some of the projects that we are looking at in the DRC, we are not looking at funding the refineries or the mines themselves. We are actually looking at energy projects to power the mines, because as you're aware, DRC is a very large country, very low levels of connection to the grid. So some of these manufacturers or some of these mining companies are actually looking at setting up their own sources of power through renewable energy, etc. And then, of course, there's access to market. And this here we're talking about the offtake agreements that these mining companies are having out there. So these are key drivers to ensure that an investor who's coming to invest in the mining sector has you know, they would want to ensure that when they do the extractives and also process them, that they do have a market for these minerals that have been processed. Last but not least, and it was already previously mentioned, is that what investors are also looking at is a stable and high quality supply of the minerals. However, what we are seeing is that a huge chunk of I would say, potential resources have not been explored. So, I mean, the exploration part and the how do you call it? The mapping, the geomapping of the potential sources of critical minerals or other precious metals has not been fully explored. In some countries, it goes about as high as 70% of the land has not been properly explored and mapped correctly, just to ensure that if you're coming in as an investor, you know that if I go to this part of the country, I know I'll get a good high-grade mineral resource. So yeah, so those will be the drivers to ensure that when investors are coming in, then they would be driven to look at localizing some of these value-adding processes. However, there's still a lot of work to be done, especially on the skill side. And this is where partnership come in. So partnering with global multilaterals that have done this elsewhere and have that skill, and they can build that skill locally as they are developing their mining facilities or processing facilities. Thanks.
So new city developments, charter cities, or just basically urban projects, new urban projects that are agglomerating infrastructure, talent and businesses could actually be very attractive destinations for capital, right? For investments.
Yeah. On new cities, so we are looking. If I give a concrete example, this is a project we're looking at in Uganda, which is an industrial park. It is a brownfield industrial park that we took over, has been in existence for a number of years, but the uptick was quite low, given that there was no infrastructure in the industrial park. Yes, it was gazetted as an industrial park, but there were very few tenants that had taken up the land to set up factories, etc. I think when we came in, it was probably about 36 tenants for quite a sizable piece of infrastructure. But as maybe let me explain what we're doing there. So we are financing the development of the horizontal infrastructure. So this is roads, it's a high-speed internet connection, ensuring that there's a water treatment plant, and access to power as well. It's an ongoing process, and we're yet to complete that project, but we're about, I would say, 70–80% of completion. But by now, what we have seen is that the uptick has been accelerated once the investors have seen there's actually the development of the infrastructure. And I think all the plots have been taken. In fact, right now there's a long waiting list on that project. This is just proof that investors are looking at usually is a term that is abused, a plug and play, a plug and play solution to set up their factory. So infrastructure is key. Unfortunately, it cannot be done solely by government. So the private sector has to come in as well, and sort of support government in developing some of these infrastructures. A very good example is what was the presentation that was given earlier this morning on Tatu City, which is a mixed-use development, but also has a bit of has a section that does light industries as well. So yeah, again, there the uptick has been rapid. Once the infrastructure was developed, it has attracted quite some big brands, some I would say some decent investors.
So in terms of your portfolio, you have alluded to supporting investments in energy in the GRC. You've just alluded to infrastructure support towards the industrial processing, industrial park here in Kenya. What else is the UK export finance looking at? Is there anything specific that you're also doing in terms of value addition beyond supporting the infrastructure that's needed to support that? Anything more direct for firms, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a wide range, but I would say it's heavily on the infrastructure side, given the massive infrastructure gap in Africa. So where we see the biggest demand is on infrastructure, and this is all sorts of infrastructure, ranging from transport infrastructure, so your roads, your airports, your rail, but also healthcare infrastructure as well, so hospitals and so on, industrial parks. We are also seeing an increasing demand of new cities. So in West Africa, we are looking at government cities as well. There's one project we are looking at in Benin, I believe, to develop an industrial city that is, again, has all the facilities to attract, to attract government bodies, but also attract private sector and so on. We also looking at financing. We are looking at projects that look at financing the private sector, so companies that are buying goods and services from the UK, because our mandate as UK Export Finance is to support UK exports. And the way this translates on the ground is that any buyer who is based overseas, could be based in Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, across the continent, as long as you're buying a certain percentage of your goods or services from the UK, then you're eligible to access our financing. And this translates into purchase of heavy equipment from the UK. Specifically in the mining sector, we looked at a project in Tunisia that was a silica mine that purchased equipment from the UK, to process this. In Uganda, we are also at the final stages of looking at a quarry that is also using UK equipment in that specific case. But more specifically, to support localization, we just launched a new product, where, unlike our classic products that require an investor to purchase goods or services from the UK, we have shifted the thinking now, and this is only applicable to critical minerals, where the UK has identified 34 odd critical minerals. That's your rare earths, your 3Ts, your cobalts, etc. As long as you have an offtake agreement with a UK offtaker, then we can look at financing your mining setup or your mining extraction or processing in country. But the condition is that you need to have an offtake agreement with a UK offtaker. And this comes back to what Max was saying, that a lot of countries are prioritizing access to critical minerals. And it's part of this strategy to encourage companies to rethink of the way they have been doing their mining activities. And obviously critical minerals go to source to provide I'd say, raw materials for some of the critical sectors like renewable energy. So things like wind turbines and so on use these critical minerals. Electric vehicles is a big one. So your lithiums go to fund car batteries, industries. And then there are more strategic sectors like defense as well. It's also a big consumer of critical minerals. And also advanced manufacturing. Advanced manufacturing was mentioned with microchips and things like that. So all these are sectors that Africa could play a key role in providing supply of these, and which could be potentially localized.
Okay, we're going to open it up very soon to the audience, but before we come to the audience, just a few insights from you, gentlemen. Maxwell, coming back to you, I mean, the geopolitics that we can't ignore. We've talked about Tatu City, which is doing fantastic things. But how can new urban developments, special economic zones like Tatu City really position themselves to be quite competitive and also avoid, the risk of being seen to lean either east or west, but, somehow ensure that indeed they're able to get the investments that are needed for these value chains to be supported on the continent?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I see SEZs as de-risking investment, right? It's creating a scalable, predictable environment in which you can then operate. But to your question, whether east or west, I think, we say in Kenya we face forward, right? It really doesn't matter. We work with partners who can help us advance our development objectives. And so when it comes to SEZs and what we can do to leverage that opportunity, I believe that's what you're touching on. I think Tatu City has provided us an excellent blueprint. It's about creating ecosystems that would allow private sector to come in and layer and advance their own priorities, but I think more importantly, whether it's a social, economic, and other priorities that are necessary to advance a country. So that's one. Then two, specifically for Africa, if you look at the dynamic between the US and China and the fact that we are seeing or starting to see onshoring and diversification of manufacturing, then Africa presents a very interesting proposition for multinationals that are looking at diversifying their supply chains. But not just diversifying their supply chains, but also meeting their, carbon neutral objectives or targets. If you take the example of my own country, Kenya, we are 90+% green in terms of the sources of our energy. And so if you are a multinational that's looking at somewhere to set up, for example, your data center, then Kenya is the place you want to be, because you're not just able to be at the heart of where the action is. If you look at the demographic dividend 20, 30 years from now, or not even from now, for 20, 30 years, but you're also meeting your net zero targets. Then thirdly, and finally, I think there's an opportunity to look at SEZs from a specialization perspective. Can there be SEZs that are very specific to certain industry clusters? And then take that and locate it within the broader regional initiatives like the Continental Free Trade Area. Yeah, so that you're creating this connectivity right across, but at the same time, there is focus and specialization that gives you an edge, a competitive edge within the environment.
Regional integration and some regional value chains, isn't it? All right, and going back to your point, so cities like Tatu that provide the good governance environment, infrastructure can actually position themselves quite well to attract some of this investment we're talking about into more value addition. Bona, before we get to the audience, Maxwell is very optimistic. I imagine you share his optimism in terms of we might actually see more investments in mineral linked industrialization and more beneficiation. as opposed to what we have seen. Do you think that's a reality given the geopolitics, this push to bring manufacturing back into the land of the free? Do you really see that Africa has that opportunity?
Yes, I definitely do. I think it's not a winner-takes-all situation. Of course, there are hairy moments that you see every so often with the tariff wars that keep going up and down. But I think that whole thing is going to be able to settle. In the end, economics trumps everything else. And the reality is that if you force an issue, you probably have to pick up a higher cost of manufacturing something that could be produced somewhere else cheaply, provide the kind of lifestyle that your population enjoys and has been enjoying for a long time. And so the easiest thing to be able to do is to go after joint venture partnerships. So and I know Zambia, Kenya, DRC, Angola, Morocco, which Zambia has got a couple of trade agreements with, are all looking at the possibility of joint ventures as the way to be able to bring industrialization onto the continent. You can bring American, first level scientific, industrialization onto the continent, whether that's biotechnology, whether that's related to, the critical minerals sector, and have a win-win situation. Okay. American scientists being able to work with their colleagues on the continent to be able to put the industries there, reduce the carbon footprint of moving these things across the oceans, and of course, I think avoiding the unnecessary cost escalation. So there is optimism on my end. There is also optimism on the fact that if you want to be able to get industrialization, you have to be able to do certain things on the continent. An energy grid can only be on the continent. So if you want to get your critical minerals, you have to be, you have to invest in the energy side of things. So that is going to happen anyway, and it's happening at a rapid pace. All forms of energy, solutions coming on board: solar, wind, turbine, geothermal, and so on. I think what is critical for Africa is to be able to present a win-win, solution in their requests and asks, which is pragmatic, which I think makes sense to any industrialist to be able to say, I would rather put it in Africa because one, there's predictability of policy. Two, there is talent that can be able to ensure that we produce at scale, speed, economy, and also at cost. Three, the approval processes of everything is fairly very fast. Africa has lots of land, has a youth demographic, which I think will not be challenged. Perhaps over the next 100 years, we will be the youngest population, and we can stop those boats crossing the Mediterranean by essentially investing in Africa and not necessarily building the wars. I speak this as a person who every so often when I'm listening to the news, I look at my former university. It's always in the spotlight, but it can be in the spotlight for good things, opening up those universities to be able to bring technology back to Africa and not necessarily shutting them down or looking inward.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you for those insights. And I guess special economic zones can provide that stability, predictability you're talking about, isn't it? As well as the talent. Isaac, coming back to you before we get into the questions from the audience, what kind of financial instruments or de-risking tools are available to catalyze investment in large-scale infrastructure projects like new cities? Yeah.
So the de-risking instruments that we use is basically a guarantee. It's a guarantee facility. So it is a UK government-backed guarantee facility. So what this does is that it crowds in the private sector financiers into a transaction. The way it works is that you've got a lender, a commercial bank, lending to a project. However, they have concerns of various risks. Could be risks of expropriation, could be risks related to political instability, etc. So what we do is that we provide a cover to cater for these risks. And what this does is that typically what the lender is doing is when our guarantee kicks in, is that they are taking risk on UK government rather than on the project itself. And that compresses the margins that they would normally charge based on the risk of the project. So this is a guarantee facility that we have deployed across the continent. Works pretty well. The advantages is that, like I said, it makes the financing competitive. One of the biggest challenges of developing projects in Africa is the cost of funding, which is exorbitantly high, sometimes due to a disconnect in the perceived risks vis-a-vis the actual risk. So this type of de-risking instruments tend to bring down the cost of funding to more, I would say, acceptable levels, and also making the project bankable, given that you are not, a huge chunk of your costs don't go into the repayment, into interest fees and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is that the tenors tend to be quite long, tend to be extended. So for project finance, this typically are around 14 years. And this is excluding the construction phase. So if you add the development phase, which is typically 2 to 3 years, then you have door-to-door tenors of up to 18 years. And for some sectors, what we call the clean growth sectors, so renewables, clean transportation, such as electric trains, etc., we can go up to 22 years of repayment. So again, this spreads out the cost of, the cost of repayment over a very long period. It also tends to match I would say, the useful life of the asset. It also matches some of the concession agreements, which are quite long-term, and basically allows project developers to manage their costs. I mean, to predict the costs over the lifespan of the project. And what it means to the lenders is that we are able to bring in lenders that normally would not be available would normally not lend to the transaction without a backstop. That's the technical term that is used, without a backstop that de-risks the transactions. As you may have gathered, we're only active on the debt space. So typically, for the equity side of things, we would work with partners that are able to provide those type of instruments. So it creates also avenues for collaboration. And as you know, it's usually a chicken and egg situation where a debt investor would come in and say, do you have an equity investor? And vice versa, an equity investor will ask, do you already have a debt investor in mind? So it also creates a platform for collaboration in developing this type of projects.
No, thank you for those insights. When you talk about longer tenure, I'm reminded of what Stephen Jennings was talking about in terms of the capital structure, how important it is, and the need for patient capital. Mm-hmm. So I guess 15 years is a good start, right?
Yeah, indeed.
All right. Yeah. So we do have a question that has come through the app, but what we'll do is we'll read out the question that's here and maybe take 2 questions from the crowd as well. No time for that? All right, I'm being told no. All right, allow me to read the question from Chavala Mulundu. And it's directed to you, Maxwell. Has there been any notable policy revision to ensure it's a win-win situation, considering the new policy shift by the US, which you rightly put, will be the biggest off-taker of these critical minerals? You already alluded to this, but maybe just briefly, yeah.
I would say that's perhaps a work in progress. We do know that because of the dynamic nature of some of the pronouncements and policy directions that are coming from Washington, most countries are now just reacting to that, right? And so I know from our own country here, what we're trying, I think the government is trying to do is to make sure that it stays relevant. If you remember, I don't know whether you're Kenyan, but the first Trump administration, Kenya was negotiating a free trade agreement with the US. That changed when the Biden administration took over, and it became a different version, not a free trade agreement. It became a strategic trade and investment partnership. Now, that as well was not concluded during the term of the Biden administration. And so one of the pushes that I know the government may be keen on is to see if AGOA is going to go away, and what would replace AGOA for Kenya specifically. Might it be that we look at reviving the free trade agreement conversation? The reason for that is the free trade agreement, in terms of its provisions, would be AGOA plus. It would be a much more enhanced, comprehensive, a modern trade agreement with the US. And as you know, a trade agreement is basically a policy instrument that will be able to deepen trade between Kenya and the US. And so you take that, and whether it applies to critical minerals or any of the other areas of interest from a US perspective, a trade agreement would be able to cover that sufficiently.
There's a question for you, Bona, which is, what are the opportunities for formal DRC-Zambia cooperation in terms of cross-border trade facilitation or doing joint infrastructure projects?
I think they're huge. Zambia and the DRC have got a standing agreement on trade. Right now, I would talk of the quick ones, which are already, in the pipelines. For example, Zambia and DRC share something like 2,300 kilometers of a border zone from the north to the northwest. That entire border zone is a multi-billion-dollar corridor. Right now, there are, one-stop border posts that are being constructed at Kasumbalesa, Kipushi, Kambimba, Kasomena Mwenda in the northern province. The Mpulungu Harbor is being modernized. Unfortunately, due to environmental issues, the water levels seem to be rising and not going the other way. And so those projects are already, in full motion. On both ends of the border, industrial yards to be able to support, goods that need to be, moved in between the two countries, either for trade reasons or for mining reasons, are happening. I think there's a push also to be able to have 24, hour economies on both borders, non-stop, processing and crossing of goods back and forth. The two countries agreed to be able to have the first electric vehicle industrial cluster within Zambia in a place called Ndola. And of course, the DRC is also looking to be able to have that as well. And so there are all of those, that are already happening and ready for, investors to be able to come along side the two countries. Land is available. At least I can speak for Zambia. We have projects in 3 of those, border regions, Kipushi, Kambimba, and a small project that we're just starting in Chingola. And so there is opportunity for various players to be able to come alongside, but for the two countries to also ensure that, their private sectors are, tied to the hip. We share a lot of things with the DRC, among which, of course, includes mining. We are Africa's first and second largest copper mining countries, and so on, and really critical to everything that involves the green transition for the world. And that's why you're seeing, players from the US, China coming on board, whether with Cobalt, Bill Gates-backed, companies and so on, or, Ivanhoe and others. They are playing on both ends of the border. Companies such as Ivanhoe have, put it out in their, public statements to their exchanges that they want to be able to ensure that they are crossing through Zambia. It's shorter towards wherever they are taking their materials to, but also a certain level of infrastructure exists within Zambia, within which to be able to do their business, to expect that the goods will be able to come in and so on. So we need to see a lot more. I think we need to see stability in the actual operations of the borders. That is one thing that I think is on the table. The borders must be predictably open every single day. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we have seen overnight, one of those borders closes. maybe because of some issues, in one of the countries. And so there needs to be a predictable government that is in place that can be able to ensure that business doesn't get disrupted. And so those are the things I think which SADC needs to essentially look at very well. But the opportunities are huge, including agro opportunities. Zambia essentially prides itself in being a good neighbor to the DRC, supplying it with a lot of food. I think our president has given a call out to Kenyans to be able to come into Zambia and put huge, farms within the Zambian region to be able to provide for the DRC. That opportunity exists, and you've got chiefdoms that are sitting with more than 500,000, hectares of land within the realm of the DRC, ready to be able to go. I'll give one example. The project I was talking about, Chief Kakoma, ready to be able to release 3,400 kilometers of his land towards both industrial zones, logistic zones, but also commercial agriculture that should be facing the DRC. You have this across the entire 2,300 kilometers of Zambia and the DRC as potentially ready to go. Thank you.
And unfortunately, we're out of time, but allow me to thank our panelists. They've been very fantastic, and to thank the audience as well for sending through the questions on the app. Just to remind everybody before you take your leave, sorry, just a minute, that another session will be starting that will be looking at modern zones for a modern economy, the future of special economic zones. This session will be led by Danielle Maus, and she will introduce the panelists. So please do stick around if you want to listen to that. Alternatively, you can proceed to the next room, which will be showcasing the second city project. Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, so much for the insights.